O Lord of hosts, be with us, for we have none other help in times of adversity but Thee. O Lord of hosts, have mercy on us.
Basically, the thirst trap is something, it's a post by an individual basically to inflame the sexual passions of other people. And in a way, both people then are considered quote-unquote thirsty. And so thirsty, and this has become another colloquium in contemporary language, is you talk to somebody who has a serious desire for sex or is overly horny or sexually stimulated. You say, man, that person's thirsty, or everything they're doing is in the attempt to, get laid, meet somebody, have sort of some type of intercourse or interaction with somebody. And we would say that person's really thirsty. But this thirst trap describes somebody who's also clearly thirsty in the sense that they're seeking the attention, the woman generally speaking, and then the man who's giving that attention. And so what I want to do then tonight is talk about thirst traps and give a sort of theological prism to look at this social phenomenon and how actually maybe it's tied to a much larger reality of spiritual warfare that I've talked about in multiple different streams. And and we've seen, and this is actually what I'm going to do next stream, is talk about the Andrew Tate phenomenon. Some of you guys seen who Andrew Tate is, and he's sort of been taking over the internet and these major social media platforms, and this is tangentially tied today's conversation because obviously Andrew Tate made a lot of money actually providing thirst traps, women doing webcam services for men, and now he's creating quite a prominent role telling men to not participate in all these betification or simplification processes. So that will be next stream, but it ties into these thirst traps, the Jezebel spirit, and how this actually then is leading to us feminizing, simplifying ourselves. And so the general framework, the whole thing, if we're going to look at this spiritual warfare, what I'm going to argue, what I'm going to try to lay out for you guys is that the energy that is being used to sort of invert the system, the sort of entropy, the energetic process is actually male sexual energy. You see, in a way, we are erecting our own entrapment. And the thirst trap, obviously it could be cars. It's most generally we're talking about a cultural phenomenon with women or people posting sexually explicit photos online. But in a way, we thirst for a lot of different things. But thirst culture and thirst traps, and specifically the sexual thirst traps, is men actually giving away our energy. And every time we look at somebody that is dressed provocatively, scandalously, sexually, we can't help but lose actual energy. And I mean that absolutely literally. Like just by looking at a woman who's dressed in a certain way, literally is a sort of, it could be at the most minute level, but it is a sort of loss of energy. And again, as the law of the conservation of energy says, energy can't be created nor destroyed. It can only be transmuted, transferred, and again, it's sort of alchemically sublimated. And I would say what's being sublimated here is that male sexual energy is actually one of the driving forces that are inverting society because we are getting trapped and trying to quench our appetites with the wrong kind of water. Obviously, then, theologically, we're going to be referencing here the Samaritan woman at the well and looking at how Christ is that water and the baptismal waters, the ingratiation of the Holy Spirit, that it's through those waters that we actually then are quenched. But the spiritual warfare, the spiritual reality that we find ourselves, how everything's actually becoming inverted, is that we men are actually trying to quench our thirst through these systems that are actually booby traps. They really are a sort of booby trap. We really are sort of bears in the wilderness with with food out there with a bear trap on it. And that's what these thirst traps really are, because what it's doing, no matter at the smallest level, just one little instance of me liking some girl's photo who's dressed provocatively or scandalously on Facebook or Instagram, that's the first thing is, guys, stop liking photos. See, the little bit of attention that we give is a transference of energy. And that transference of energy then recapitulates a process, a feedback loop that then validates the Jezebel. And that is the inverted archetype of the woman. And it's us men, in a way, who have allowed that to occur because we pursue those women and still will get with those women, marry those women, and condone those certain activities. And so, let me begin here. Thirst traps then are part of a larger spiritual battle to simplify men. Because my argument is the ultimate masculine thing we can do is to say no. No. Absolutely no. That these women who begin to transgress these boundaries, again, who embody the Jezebel spirit, and even it could be our sisters. Unfortunately, maybe, again, everybody's in different situations. Could be your mother. But we see the women out there in that we're living in a system. This inverted system is creating women as idols. And so as man loses God, as man loses Christ, as man loses that water which actually quenches our thirst, we then pursue an idol. And I would say for many men, actually, whether they're conscientious or not, their idol is women. And trying to acquire the attention of women, the acceptance of women, the sexual availability of women. And so this then contributes to us in a simplifying process of giving the Jezebel the attention that it wants, which then validates and reifies her being a Jezebel, and also is part of a process of us slowly giving away our energies. And it's that energy, the man, it's us choosing to say no, which actually stops the sort of sublimation of our sexual energies to inverting the entire world, where women are sort of worshipped as a goddess spirit or whatever. And so you can see the climate change, the paganism, the progressive regression. All this stuff is tied to men unable to say no. No. Absolutely not. And so we are in the desert. If you go and look up then references to thirst in Scripture, you'll see water and thirst for God comes up multiple times in references to people being in the desert. And I would say we are in the desert for sure. That 2022, the Great Reset, or post the Great Schism, I mean, in some way or another, we are in the desert trying to move back towards the promised land, which to at this point in history must be the second coming of Christ. And so we are in the desert, and as people and as the Israelites were in the desert, we are thirsting for things, but we are then taking in that which actually dehydrates us. And so as we then accept the Jezebel, as we then become manipulated by our sexual passions, guys, I'm just as guilty here. I'm just as guilty here, but we have to realize that the men are the number one enemy of this system. And so we then men are in the desert, and we're surrounded by the desert. We're surrounded by wilderness, quote unquote, metaphorically, theologically speaking. We are in the wilderness. We're not in the promised land right now. And so in the wilderness, we then are looking for something to quench our thirst. And we keep falling victim to ultimately an evil, again, this is part of the inversion. This is the evil one's agenda for us then men to go quench our thirst with all these different preordained systems that are ultimately traps that ultimately lead us then to inverting the world the way it should be. And then you realize as you go deeper in this, the whole system can be recorrected by men saying no. No. So the world is getting women to worship themselves, causing men to also worship the women. Because men can't say no to women, and I mean this on a multiplicity of levels here, that the inability of men to say no to women has led to men essentially following the woman in the worship of herself. Whether it be feminism, whether it be look at the society, look at the feminine slant, this whole system then, the weak man, the beta man, the simplified man, is in a way worshiping the woman as she then worships herself. And this is like the false mirror. This is, in a way, is the black mirror, right? I did a whole stream on the black mirror talking about technology, right? Technology. These are black mirrors. The women, in a way, are falling in love with themselves as they look through the black mirror, the mirror, and as they fall in love with themselves, the men are then following suit. The men are following suit. And this is part of the worship of the world. This is part of us following the lead of Adam and not Christ. You see, Christ gave the Samaritan woman eternal water to eternally quench her thirst. And what happens? We follow Adam, and we are like the simplified man. Adam is the first simp, right? He listens to Eve. Instead of following what God does, instead of doing what he knows he's supposed to do, he follows Eve. And by following Eve leads to then the entire fall of creation. And this is exactly what's happening with the thirst traps. It's the recapitulation of the original fall from the garden. It's the same thing. And this, so whether it's, I'm not saying Adam worshiped Eve or anything, but I'm saying now in the wilderness, now in this pagan 21st century, we are actually following the lead of Adam and then doing what the women are told. And the women are transgressing the boundaries of God, and we are then following them, just as Adam followed Eve. We must say no. No. And so every time a man is presented with sexual temptation, he loses energy. And I mean this on a very real level. We literally are losing energy as we engage with any of the sort of sexual temptation. Guys, smash that like. We got 100 some people in here, only 60 likes. Smash that like if you guys are here. And if you want to support, feel free to use the Streamlabs link. And again, I'm going to leave plenty of time at the end to get into all the super chats. So, what I mean by we literally lose energy every time we engage with the sort of sexual temptation is, think about a Muslim society. Think about our society if women were covered up. If women were dressed in a more traditional way, a way that wasn't always exposing their breast. And here's the thing. That's what I was trying to explain to a woman is like, we can't help but be affected by it. I'm sorry, women. I'm sorry. We men are going to do the best we can to say no to the Jezebel. But at the same time, you must recognize that we are dealing with sexual energy. This is the most power and the most primitive, if you want, the most primitive sort of energetic process we have in our bodies. And this is where the evil one's manipulating us at that sort of animalistic level, manipulating us with this sort of sexual energy. But shoot, you go around these girls with, again, the hips and the butts and the leggings and all the, and then the hip to waist ratio. Look, we can do our best as men, but we are affected every time we see it. It affects us whether we want it to or not. When we're at the gym, when we're on Instagram, when we're going through the grocery store, it's genetic. We are affected by it. And that's where it's a sort of magical process, right? The plastic surgery, the makeup, the women are able to sort of concoct themselves in a way that literally manipulates us at a very serious level. And this is a form of witchcraft to a degree. But when you think of like a Muslim society, when you think of a society where women are covered up, we men literally wouldn't have those sexual energies taken from us or have it be represented in the front of our minds all the time. If we lived in a society where women were covered up and where they had more traditional clothing on, the values were a little different, i.e. Muslim nations, yes, I'm sure the men are tempted just as much, and I get it. I get the idealism. I'm not trying to paint an idealistic society or utopia, but my point being is us men wouldn't constantly have these passions inflamed in our minds, which then draws us away from our purposes, draws our way from our businesses, draws us away from our families, draws us away from making money, all these things in which we then must be masculine to fulfill the traditional role. And so, as I said, this is totally tied with the law of the conservation of energy. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And so when we are entering into a thirst trap, we are in a way entering into a magical entrapment that is going to sublimate and take that sexual energy from us. And so Men, as I said here, must say no to hoes. And I don't mean that to be aggressive or to use any sort of profanity or be demeaning to women. I don't mean that. Obviously, we have beautiful traditional Orthodox women here in our online Ortho circle. And but I just mean this sort of tongue in cheek. We must say no to hoes. This is essential for the realignment of society, because we can't blame women for anything. Us men cannot blame women for anything, especially if you're a traditional man. The only people we can blame is men. Now, we can talk about the general state of women, and if you're a single man and you're out here trying to date and you're trying to find a wife and you're trying to find somebody to build a family with, it ain't easy. That's for sure, and we all get it. But and the same thing's true for men. The men aren't as masculine as they used to be because of the thirst traps, right? That's part of the problem. Is the only way that we end this process is every single man. I'm talking about every man watching this. You have a duty to become as masculine as possible. And you have a duty to say no to women who transgress traditional boundaries as much as possible. Because both those efforts, you both building yourself in a traditionally masculine way and you saying no to the women who transgress those boundaries, realigns society. And may not correct society in our lifetime, but it will correct our households. It will correct the environments our children live in. It will correct the environments of our churches and our communities and all that stuff. So that is why, we can't blame women. We can talk about the state of things, but men, we have to become the most masculine versions of ourselves, the most competent versions of ourselves, the best version of ourselves. And this then allows us to say no to the women. No, absolutely not. Do not like a photo. Do not send DMs. If they transgress these boundaries, if anything, publicly, you can say something to stop it, right? I'm not saying to shame people. We shouldn't be shaming people. But we should bring back men voicing the standards of traditionality. Put some clothes on. Go put some clothes on. This whole, there's no such thing as slut shaming anymore. Okay, that's again the inversion of the archetype. And so this is where I argue that we must say no, because the Jezebel is now the idealized woman. She is the idealized archetype most women actually want to be. Why? Because she gets the attention, she gets the pleasure, she gets the authority, she gets all the leverage. Because a simpified man has no leverage in dating. He has no leverage. Because all he wants is the sex because he's so thirsty. All he wants is the physical pleasure because he's so thirsty. We get our thirst quenched from God, and therefore we say, no. We don't engage in that stuff. No, I'm sorry. I'm not interested.